Hey, we're here and we're back with Lisa M. Bell, who is a children's book author, and she started by writing a children's blog to explain solar energy, and that turned into a book. And now she has 6 children's books and 1 adult Bible study. And we're going to find out from Miss Lisa about her inspiration, about her writing process and ideas and what excites her, and just all these things that we all seem to have to do, right? We have to get on camera, we have to talk to strangers, we have to market ourselves, we have to write email copy. Who told us that we'd have to do this? Well, we're here where we're at. So Lisa M. Bell from lisambell.com is going to tell us about just this writer's lifestyle. She does health and travel articles, children's books, and so many exciting things. So Lisa, glad to be speaking with you.
Yes, I'm glad to be speaking with you as well. I hope you're having a good afternoon.
I am. I'm jumping from thing to thing and staying busy, but that's good, right? That's okay. If you're busy, as long as it's for a worthwhile cause and productive, it keeps the bad thoughts away and keeps that forward momentum. So it keeps you out of trouble, right? So nothing wrong with that. And as far as what you're all about, right? I introduced you as best as I could, but what did I leave out? What currently just has you so excited to jump out of bed in the morning?
Oh, well, I'm going through some changes right now. I've decided to leave a position to focus full time on authoring and my lifestyle membership, traveling a little bit. So that is what has me excited now.
Nice. You're retired. You're living the dream. You quit that 9 to 5 to be all in on you and your passions. And so what is that? If someone said, all right, you're a writer, what do you write? Where can I find it? What are you working on? What's the answer?
The answer is I've got a few irons in the fire right now. And that's the way I've
Oh, I
always
think you're
been.
muted. Oh, you're back.
So today's journey was on doing more research on the mascots and also my very first book. I am working with a Nigerian intern, and he let me know that not only do they have regular power outages over there, but they also don't have the same lifestyle that we here in America have. And so my book was too expensive for parents over there. So I thought, well, what can we do? And I had always had an activity in mind to show kids what goes on inside a solar panel, to act it out. And so I wrote that today. I'm having it reviewed by a science teacher. And then we are going to see about bringing it to school systems, both here in America as well as the Nigerians, and make it affordable for them, use affordable materials and so forth. And hopefully their kids will learn to appreciate solar energy and at least know what it does. Maybe they'll make improvements on it. Who knows? Or maybe it will just be something that they grow to understand how it can incorporate into their lives moving forward.
Well, very cool. Very exciting. So you're educating that next generation, and you making me think about when I was a kid, and there's things that still stick in my memory decades later, right? There's like the very hungry caterpillar and learning about the 4 phases of going from caterpillar to butterfly. I have all these super old memories of learning about like Bernoulli's principle and how airplanes fly, and it's all. And I remember it was just like these like 5-10 page, just real simple, big pictures of children's books, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm so glad that I just had these fun memories from a young age. And so why are you focusing on these children's books instead of like the books for us adults?
You want the honest truth?
Of course.
Kids are more fun to write for. It doesn't go as long, but they also, and when you do a reading with them, they'll just start shooting out their opinions and their thoughts. And a lot of times I'll ask them to, but sometimes I don't, and they'll just start telling me their own story, which can be just as interesting. So they're
Nice.
kind of fun to work with. But I guess you could say I also have I like to write the shorter stories. So when I do write for adults, it tends to be things like I wrote the Bible study that's maybe about 40 pages. And then I'm working on a collection of short stories right now because I cannot do the long plot twists and the downtimes. I sit in an author group and I listen to them talk about how their plots go from chapter to chapter. And I'm like, that is not for me. But you have to decide your role in what you do. I know, like, for instance, if you're a nurse, you may love working in the ER, but not so much in the psych ward, or vice versa. Depends on what you're supposed to be doing. Lawyers, I think, have the same issue. It's like, what type of law? Because I mean, you can go very, very deep with the law, and, not so much this, like trying to know the overall law or overall medicine sometimes can just be overwhelming, and overall writing is the same way,
Oh
at
yeah.
least for me.
And there's some marketing business lessons in there, right? This idea of niching down, specializing, becoming really good at one thing that's in demand. That way you can get super good at it. You can have a process. You can charge those higher prices, but then also to jump over that really scary canyon of, well, if I'm super specific, then who will find me? And then you really have to deliver, right? As far as like finding your exact people and being dialed into the market, and knowing what they want. So that way they say, oh my gosh, Nigerian books for kids about solar panels. This is exactly my person that I need to be getting in touch with. And so you figure out what suits your personality, right? I'm sure with these writer groups, there's the people with the 10 book series and all this crazy intricate plots. And that's great for them if that's what they enjoy. But if it doesn't suit you, then it's refreshing, because I imagine that some people want to be writers or want to put out books, but they come up with excuses and they say, oh, well, I can't write 500 pages. And someone like you is like, well, hey, you can specialize in something that's shorter attention spans, short stories, or even kids books. And so for selfish reasons, I have a couple of questions about these kids books, because as you know from us talking, like I've made a couple of just quick books for my son, and it was a lot of fun, but it was slightly more work than I expected. It wasn't like a lot more, but I was just like, oh, I'll whip out 10, 20 pages. But I had to make sure like it kind of kept the attention throughout. And then if I made one stylistic change and like page 3, I had to go and like do it. So it was like a different sort of work. And what have you discovered as far as creating these children's books, and also specifically like how they differ from like regular books? What are the surprises that you came across making these kids books?
Well, each one has been a little bit of a surprise, because one's on solar, one's on Christmas, and the length, and most of the time, fiction writers were just kind of liars, I guess you could say. So there are times when you can make things up as you go along, but when I tried the nonfiction, it was like, oh, in some ways this is easier, in some ways not, because you have the facts to pull from, but then you have to double check them to make sure that it's correct.
Oh, yeah.
So each one has been a little different. With the solar book, I tried to incorporate reality of the solar panel with the fiction of the characters. So that's kind of a crossover, I suppose. And each one has brought its own little challenges, but my surprises have and it's usually in the details. It's not the major thing that comes at you, like the title or something else. It's always, how did you get this picture, or where did you get this information, and go back and quote the site. It's like, that's really a detail, but you should probably check it to make sure. And oh gosh, other surprises, like just some of the things that the kids will say at the readings. That's a surprise too, because you can get a group of 5 and they'll all be on a different mental platform. Some of them won't say anything, but there's one that's always going to go, but what about, and you, have you thought about this or that, or, and it's like, oh, okay. Yeah. Good idea. I mean, they're the best people to get your information from, I guess. But sometimes it has thrown me when I have done a reading with kids, and the things that they come up with that I never would have thought they would have gotten out of it. So those have been my surprises.
And is there anything in particular that sticks with you as far as something interesting one of these kids said as far as the feedback or new ideas?
Yeah, when I was doing the reading for the Christmas tale, I asked the kids, what they would like to see. And it's about a snowman reading to a reindeer. And they informed me that they would like a snowman zoo in the
Wow.
next story. So if I write a next story, I suppose I will write in a snowman zoo. What the heck? It's done in a snowy area. Might as well add a zoo, right?
Yeah. And that makes it exciting, right? Because in this day, like you compare present day technology to a couple of decades ago, one kid's book might have taken who knows how many years, right? How much of
Right.
the printing and the artists, and nowadays we have all these tools at our disposal, right? There's the AI generators, there's the Canva, there's the print on demand, so we could easily make some kind of mock up or just kind of figure out using our own software and create something and just iterate in this way, right? You come out with a cool book, you come up with the Christmas book, the kids say, hey, can there be this snowman zoo? You put that out, you read that to the kids, and then maybe they give you more ideas, and it's like they're literally handing you what they want to see more of. And it's an amazing time to be alive, right? Because I think a lot of us have daydreamed about, like, I wish there was a movie or a TV show that's this, but now you're the one that can provide that to these kids.
Yeah, and I think a lot of those things have come about because a lot of people had that thing in their head that said, "Wouldn't it be nice if?" And then they
Yeah.
went ahead and did it. Because that's where you're getting your vision from. What you visualize, you can make come true. Now there, and I'm sure you found this out with your books. You saw it. There were some details and some derailments along the way, but you made it to the end path of basically what you want. Sometimes it ends up being improved along the way, and other times you turn it like, oh, I hadn't thought. Like, if I were to look at my first manuscripts on any one of these books, they almost look nothing like the finished product. By the time you go through editing, by the time you go through just putting it down for a few minutes, and then you get back and you look at it and it's like, why did I write that? That doesn't make sense. Let's go back and fix that. So you fix it 5 or 6 times, and then you send it to the editor and they're like, well, why'd you say that? And then they fix it again. So it really, it goes through many, many changes. The concept stays the same. But most of the time, a lot of the writing gets simplified, broke down. Um, and the thing that I realized with my very first book was I had the wrong age range. I had way too many words for the beginning reader, so it's more like intermediate, elementary. I guess you would say maybe like 10, and 11 year olds, that type of thing, because of the amount of words. Now, had I broken down the concept, I would have, and I may go back and redo it at some point. I may not, or I may just, I don't know, go with a sequel and make that the one that is simplified. But yeah, it's a process, and you have to learn, who your audience is. And in my case, my audience is one and my customers are the other. Like many adult writers, their customers are the adults make the purchase. In my case, the parents and the grandparents make choices, aunts, uncles, that type of thing, for what they're going to buy for their child, family member.
And I think
So
that's
it's a little different. You have to
yeah,
appeal to both.
yeah, that's a fun distinction. Like I had a friend who would sell like study guides, like how to, study for your SATs and college entrance exams and things like that. And it was failing because he was trying to sell to the kids who didn't care about their grades. But then instead, when he says I sell to the parents who then secondarily care about their own kids, then that it made sense. So it sounds like it pays to really think your audience through and to go through the tedium or the repetition of like going back and saying, well, hey, the book's on the right track, but it's a wrong audience. The page count, the font size is wrong. We have to kind of go back and reiterate. And it's kind of just, I sometimes I wonder if I'm a weirdo because I really enjoy that idea of the ideas taking shape, right? In a lot of ways, right? If you draw,
Mhm.
if you sketch, if you write, if you do computer program, it's like there's the perfection that is in your imagination. But then when you go to create it, there's unexpected obstacles along the way, and the end result is like far different than what you end up with. Like when I was a kid, I loved reading novelizations of movies because when they would make a novelization, it'd be based on like a super early draft of like Star Wars or Home Alone or something like that. And I liked the differences. I liked how it would be like way different. And I wonder if I'm just like a weirdo, be enjoying how TV shows and movies like take shape. I really like the beginning stories of how they change stuff versus the final output. Like, do you think about this the way that like ideas form and take shape, or am I a total weirdo?
No, you're really not. It's actually how you see the art or the project in your brain. Like if you were to draw a project out on paper, you would have step one, step two, step three, and so forth. What you're doing is stepping it in your brain. Does that make
Ooh,
sense?
yeah. And sometimes you write step one, step two, step three. You're like, I needed like step 3.5. I need step like 3C. And does that ever drive you crazy? Because sometimes it's hard to get through that thinking through process, and you end up sometimes like giving up or getting discouraged when outlining or planning sometimes.
It you can or you can just say, look, after you get through the discouragement, especially if you've been working out a long time, and I think if it's stressing you out, that's the time when you need to, if you're not under a deadline, if you've given yourself enough time, you won't be in this position. But if you're under a deadline, that's going to be especially hard, and it's going to feel like what people call crunch time. I try not to ever have a crunch time. It's just, it won't work for me. um there are times when I lose it, like, earlier with that. I'm getting better about catching myself, which is an improvement that I'm seeing. And it's through working through these steps. It's like, okay, you had this error in publishing. Now let's fix this one. You've had this experience. Let's not do that again. But the interesting thing with publishing is they change it almost as much as retail changes displays. It seems my publisher, one minute you'll have to have an EPUB for one book, and 2 months later when I publish the other one, they're like, oh no, a Word docs. And I'm like, okay, could we make up our minds here? Because this is giving me whiplash. But I think it's actually improving the process. It's just that you end up mentally preparing yourself for something a lot more sometimes than it actually needs to be. So the changes in some cases are good. But yeah, I think there comes a point when you have to stop letting it go around in your head and put it down on paper. And then if you just have to say, okay, I need a page 5A or whatever in here, and you just renumber your pages. Say, for instance, if it's a book, if it's a drawn out project, then your next step just fit it in between, redo it, and then you can breathe easier because you'll know it's the right thing to do. But two, you're not sitting there just fussing with it and having it go around in your head. It's all of a sudden, it's just like, okay, it's here. I see it. I needed to add this here. And in some cases, you have a takeaway too, like, oh, well, that doesn't look right now. That's too much information or something, And so you go ahead and you modify that because you've got to think about it. In my case, from, 5, 6, 7, 8 year olds perspectives, like, do they really need to know blank? And so if that's not something, like when I sit down and talk to a kid that age, if they're really not into that, it's like, nah, don't need that. you know it's what's going to hold their interest, and I do my best to keep it that way. And I try to pick unique topics too, like not something you have a lot on. There are a lot of children's books, a lot of them. I'm sure when you go to the library you see this, but sometimes it's not on the thing that you need.
Yeah, like solar
So
panels.
yeah, a lot. That I told you how that started, right?
I don't. I think you might have, but I forgot.
So back when I was selling the small solar project products like the lights and the solar chargers for your phones and stuff like that, off-grid items like if the power goes out, that type of stuff. Somebody told me that if you explained it to a very young child, everyone will get it. So I started writing a children's blog, and that's when I introduced characters. And then after a while, I was like, well, I kind of like this. I think I might turn it into a book. So after a few years, I did. And we had Sunny and Ray shining on the earth, and, the whole doggone thing that went through the book. But I talked to a lot of adults. They have no idea. They know if something shines on the panel, that energy is created somehow. But beyond that, they really didn't know. And it's not that tough a concept, except it's done on a microscopic level, so nobody sees it. It's not like a pump that you see moving or something like that. It's just something you can't see unless you have a microscope, of course. But so I'm working on a project to bring that out so that people will be able to see it, and then they'll understand. No, don't put the solar light in your covered garden. Put it where the light goes. It'll work much better. You'll be much happier. Or at least if you're going to have a light under shade, go ahead and have a detached solar panel, the ones that have the cords, put that out in the sun and then leave the light where you need it in the shade or something like that. But yeah, the least little bit that gets covered up, oh my goodness, yeah, it can really cost you a lot as far as efficiency goes.
Right. So people need these instructions, and you imagine that adults have just stopped asking questions. With a kid, so much is new to them. They think, okay, well, where does electricity come? Like, where's the power plant at? What are these radio waves going through me? What is light? What's that rainbow? And then adults just take
Mm-hmm.
all of it for granted, right? We've stopped asking questions. And so it's a
Yeah.
very important, needed service to talk about these topics, but then also it seems like a lot of attention needs to be put on to the refinement and making sure that it's accessible, that it's fun, it keeps attention, and that way it appeals to all sorts of ages. That the target is that young age group, but even adults can be educated about the photovoltaic cells and about the solar panels and about the proper usage and everything that goes in it. And I always try to keep these podcasts short, but I'm having so much fun talking to you, and I just want to squeeze in a couple of last questions. And one is, you mentioned about doing the readings for the kids, right? The marketing of the book, and I find that really interesting because a lot of times with any publisher, right, doesn't matter if they're traditional or the smaller ones, they seem to leave authors on their own to do the marketing. And so when you say I'm putting out kids books, I'm doing these readings, like, how do you go about marketing? Do you call the local libraries or the schools? Like, how do you get yourself sort of booked as a guest speaker, but for kids, so to speak?
Well, that is challenging. And I have talked to preschools, I have talked to the libraries, and it's a limited thing. Currently, what we're doing here locally is having authors pair up with other businesses to promote. So it may not be specifically to kids, but there's ways that you can get yourself out there. Yeah, so I've done readings at the library. I think I'm probably going to go into a learning center here soon. That was one of the businesses that responded. And just, which you just have to let people know sometimes that you're there, and you're willing to do it. Many times these organizations, they're so busy doing their own things. And if you can imagine, like a daycare center, for instance, they've got they've got a list of rules a mile long about how, safety, this, that, and the other. It's extra for them to do this, but it's also part of their fun activities. So it's like, oh, when they're dealing with the day to day, then all of a sudden there's this refreshing thing that's like, oh, that might be a nice treat for the kids or whatever. So they'll think about it. But when you're just going about your day, it's kind of like a job. You've got, okay, the kids checked in, then they've got to have their naps, then they've got to have meds or whatever it is they're doing. And then by the time you finally get through answering all the telephone calls, catching up on all the paperwork, there might be time for another thought. Maybe, but then it's time for the kids to go home and you're checking everybody out. So I've been in those positions where, you know, you you can maybe think of a different thing to do, but do you in your course of the day go out and have time to look it up? No. So if people like me let themselves be known that, I'm available for this, then all of a sudden it comes up on their radar.
Yeah.
So that's my thought anyway. I don't know. It seems to be the way it works. You put yourself out there, and some of the libraries have their own programs going on. Like they have a schedule of things I think that they want to cover. The one down here does, in fact, in all our local libraries here, they will do like a major big walkthrough. I think at Christmas time they did something. They'll do something occasionally during for their summer reading program, and they kind of go all out, but it needs to work with their theme.
Right.
So if you work with their theme, it goes pretty well.
And that's all the more reason to iterate and customize and be prolific and specific. So that way, if there is, and especially this whole theme that we've been talking about of mentally preparing and project managing ahead of time. So if you know that that learning center or that library is going to have such and such theme coming up in 6 months for Christmas, maybe get that book figured out now, and don't necessarily just churn out stuff because it's random and it's fun for you, but figure out like what's your target, what's your goal. Okay, well, if there's going to be this Christmas theme stuff, let me get this Christmas kids book figured out, knowing that I'll then be doing some marketing prospecting. And it seems like, everyone always has the problem with confidence, right? The low self-esteem. And what you're saying is, if you're looking to present your book to these daycares or these learning centers, or whoever will take you, the added service you're providing is to break up the monotony of the day. And if they reject you, if they say no, there's so many reasons, right? You might just not fit in the schedule. They might already have that taken care of, and all the more reason to put yourself out there and to do the amount of numbers that you need to make, right? Make the phone calls, the letters, the emails, so that way you find your fit, you find your people, and that way you can get some of this experience under your belt and kind of just open yourself to even more opportunities, right? And that way, hopefully, if someone is looking up Miss Lisa M. Bell, who has some excellent kids books, including, I believe, Boo Goes Woo, and we have, what are some of the other titles?
So we've got Boo Goes Who, and that was actually the illustrator and I had a little deal. She illustrated for my book, and I put the words to hers. Her concept was, when she worked at a zoo, she noticed that kids were afraid of animals of the night. Her name's Sarah, and she wanted to make them less scary. And so she thought, if we went ahead and said why they look the way they do, like why do they have to have the big eyes? Well, in the dark, your eyes have to be bigger to be able to see. The way, like in the dark, our pupils are bigger, and then when in the light, that there's that transition, because your pupils are so big, and then when you hit the light, it's like, well, wait a minute, and then your pupil goes down a little bit, so we adjust. But animals of the night, they always have that, where they need to see, or they have the bigger teeth because of the job they do, and somehow it seemed to make them less scary. And Boo just doesn't feel like he fits in, so he's trying to figure his way out in the world too. My other titles are The Adventures of Sunny and Ray. Obviously, that's the solar book. Cool. A Christmas Tale. That one I wrote off of this one picture. We had to have pictures added to it because I thought the artist was actually an illustrator, possibly. And I asked her, and she said no. I said, well, do you mind if I write a story off it? And she says, yeah, that's fine. And so I sent it to her privately, thinking that was the end of it. And she said, can we publish this? And I said, well, we're going to need a couple more pictures if we're going to do that. So it went from there, and I thought it was kind of a cute little story, and so did she. And I've never met her either. It's interesting. These two kind of go together. Kenny was a deaf dog that we had at the shelter down here. And she was life of the party, had no idea there was anything going on with her. She didn't know she was different, which is probably a good thing. But we think that's why she was a stray. Her kennel mate, Matrix, came in due to no fault of his own. His owner was not able to take care of him anymore. And you'd have thought they were from the same litter. So the shelter checked to see if they were good to play together, and they hit it off like you wouldn't believe. Now, they didn't speak the same language. They couldn't, because she's deaf. So she had to watch for visual clues. But Lord, she would just pop you, and getting a picture of that dog was something. And so he was depressed because he was there. Again, he hadn't done anything wrong. And she was like, bam, come on, let's go. Run around, play with toys. They had an awesome time together. And he would let her know when somebody was coming up to the cage so that she could get her treats and so on and so forth. And They actually ended up getting adopted separately, but on the same weekend, which was good because I don't know how they would have done separately. But Cammie used to do this little thing when you'd come up to her cage. A lot of people didn't read the sign, and she'd just go like this. And finally, the kennel tech would say to the people, because they're like, "Oh, that's so cute," and she said, "Yeah, she's trying to figure out what you're doing with that hole in your face. She has no clue. She can't hear a thing." And they're like, "She's deaf," and that would kind of put the people off. Well, anyway, now that they've been adopted, they are off to training in school, just like any kid would be. But they're learning sign language and they're learning to make new friends, and people are learning to communicate with Cammie, just like Cammie is learning to communicate with them.
Well, nice.
And the real animals, this is my truth teller. This was the first time I ever told the truth. I didn't make it all up. Okay, the real animals of ships and submarines. I was working at the St. Mary's Submarine Museum, and when I was going through the earlier files, I noticed there were cats and dogs and chickens, and I had never known that they were on submarines before. So when I started asking, they said, "Oh yeah, there were a lot of them." And I started researching and found that there were many, many more in all branches of the service and around the world. So this was just kind of I don't know, the start of a lot of possible projects. There'll be more on this. And then this was my anomaly. I had never planned on writing a Bible study ever. It's for adults. Since that is now out, you know how we talked about how one thing leads to the other? This
Yeah.
morning, someone said, "Well, why don't you write a kids study on it? It's right in
Ooh.
your area." And I said, "Okay, maybe I will." But so that was something I decided to try after much nudging from the guy upstairs because I didn't want to do it. I like writing for kids, but this was kept short, so it was good. And I did teach it for the first time last night, and it seemed to be okay. So you never know where you're going to end up, right?
Right. And the only way to know where you're going to end up is to do nothing and just to sit there and wonder what could have been. But a way more exciting, adventurous life is to say, I'll make that blog, which will lead to that kid's book, which will lead to the other kid's book, and I'll make that Bible study, which will lead to Bible study for kids. And I love the forward momentum and saying yes to the opportunities and making decisions based on your reality and not your imagination, right? Imagination is great to get you started, but then the project takes shape, you put it out there, you get the feedback from the kids, you get the feedback from the publisher, you put it out there, and then that feedback leads to other things. And I think that's a way more just better lifestyle to be living is based on the facts that come back, even though sometimes there's criticism, frustration, uncertainty, but hey, we have to power through and embrace that and go through that writer's lifestyle while also balancing the project management of it all and saying, well, I don't want to be crunched of a deadline and be stressed because that's no way to live. So I want to get to things ahead of time and do my marketing of the book. And you think about like the Stephen King, like you write, 500 words a day, 2,000 words a day, and just kind of have the writer's discipline while also balancing the chaos of creativity. And somehow it all works, right? Somehow you've made it work to the point where you quit your 9 to 5. Now you're all in on this book publishing, this book authoring. And so we mentioned some of these books, which we can find at lisambell.com. There's that Bible study, Will You, which explores the reasons that you may be dismissing your desires. And if you know what stops you, then you can possibly change. There's these books for kids that we mentioned. There's Cammie, the Shelter's Deaf Puppy Makes a Friend, Cammie and Matrix Go to School, Adventures of Sunny, Ray, and Friends, which is that solar panel book, A Christmas Tale, which is now leading to the zoo for snowmen. There's the real animals of submarines and ships. There's Boo Goes Who, and I'm sure many more to come. And so what are you currently working on? What's the next exciting project on the horizon for you, other than like 4 things you already mentioned?
Oh, Lord. Yes, I know. It's hard to keep up with some of them. Short stories with the mascots. See, what happened was after I published that book, I had a 9th grade teacher write to me and say she used that in her class, and I thought that was a bit odd. So, but then she got me started on something else. She said, my dad was on the USS Senate, and the Senate is more famous for having the penguin on board that jumped on board. Okay, that's a whole story in itself. But so I went back and looked through the pictures, and I said, yeah, there was actually a dog. It was a beagle type dog. Well, I could see the picture, and she loved it, but she's like, do you know the dog's name? I still can't find that dog's name. But that has led me to reach out. What had happened was her dad had written her a letter that said we had to give up our dog today because he needed more sunshine and he needed a place to run around. So we gave him to the B-29ers, meaning the B-29 bombers back then. This was back in the 1940s. And she, like I said, she asked me the dog's name, and I was like, okay, I'll try. So I reached out to the B-29ers. Well, I found out that they had a ton of mascots. The United States Army Air Forces. That's what they were called back then. It was not always the Air Force. So they had a bunch of them, and sometimes they would put them onto what they would call their nose art. Because that's, I don't know, I guess that was a thing in the Air Corps back then, or the Air Force back then, was when you were trying to show how tough you were or whatever, I guess, or just the fighting spirit, or to keep your morale up, you did nose art, and it was usually of the crew, or sometimes it would be of something a little bit of risque stuff. There was one I was looking at today. It was called the Jezebel. I will leave to your imagination what that looked like, but they did have a dog in the picture. And then some of the a lot of them were dogs, but a lot of them, those mascots were not dogs. They had cats, chickens. There's one that's a very famous one, chicken, little guy that sit on their neck. Most of the time with submarines, it was the smaller dogs. Some of the ships, however, have had pigs. They have had goats. Submarines have had usually the smaller goats. Bears in some cases, monkeys. I've gone back as far as World War I and found lions in the camp. So, and if you look at the Polish army, they had, I believe it's pronounced Wojciech. He actually got a promotion. He was adopted as an orphan. You have to remember that back then we did not have the animal rules and rescues that we have today. So they found this orphan bear, took him in. Usually it was out of a kindness because they had been an orphan. And he actually worked with the crew. They taught him to move armament, and I mean, he'd be taking fire and stuff like that. Well, one day, I believe it was, they went they met with the British, and the British said they did not want that bear in the camp. They weren't going to stay, whatever. And so the Polish said, well, fine, we'll enlist him. And they did so. So then the British couldn't say anything because he was actually officially part of the company. And then he went through a pretty fierce battle at one point, I believe it was. And I'll have to go back and read the story again, so don't quote me on any of this. But and he received a promotion to Sergeant Wojciech.
Wow.
And there was a big to-do when the war was over with what to do with Wojciech, because he had become a beloved member of their crew unit, whatever you want to call it. These animals did. They belonged to the entire crew. They weren't, most of the time, they were not someone's pet. Occasionally, you can read where a pet was allowed to be brought to the military with the service member, but generally they belonged to the crew.
Well, when is that kid's book coming out?
Ooh, that's more, I'm graduating. That's the short stories for adults, because after that 9th grade teacher wrote to me and said, I used this in my class, I thought, well, maybe we need to do something for the little bit older people, because adults do show a great interest in it. There's not a lot on them, so keeping the story short works within my wheelhouse, and that makes me happy. So putting a collection of them together, I can do it. To say I won't write a novel someday, I won't say it, but it's not something I want to do right now. I just like the short stuff. So
yeah. You see what kind of opportunities present themselves. And I think a couple of years ago, I was reading some article about, like, with with video games, like say like Super Mario comes out and they make this decision of, do we stay in that age group and keep making it for the newer batch of kids, or do we follow the kids as they become teenagers and grow up? And it's a lot of fun to think about, right? Like, where do you fit in the what niches and what age group and what kind of kids and what they're interested in? But it seems like you're definitely on a track, on a path to staying on progress and putting these things out, putting out the kids' books, because it's so important for kids to make time to read, especially nowadays with the screens and the tablets and the apps and the streaming. And you hear about how it's just a shame that a lot of kids like don't barely go outside compared to our generations. And so it's
Mhm.
good to encourage that reading. Readers are leaders. And that website we said is lisambell.com. And before we let you go, it's time for the scary part of the show where I ask for a quote or lesson that has served you. And it can be a little on the spot thing to ask of you, but what comes to mind as far as a final quote or lesson for our listeners?
Okay, well, back when I was doing the very adult sales of solar energy, it's one I've already told you. Somebody said to me once, if you can make a very young child understand it, everybody will get it. And that has stuck with me throughout. There have been other lessons, but I think that's the one that started the whole thing.
I love it. They call that ELI5, right? Explain it like I'm five. And if they can get it, then the rest of us can get it. And that's helpful just in general, right? When we're trying to get through to people, we can easily make ourselves look smart and throw in the technical jargon, but like dumb it down, so to speak. That way it has this wider appeal. It might even take more work to make it more accessible, but it's worth doing and worth pursuing. And it's especially worth pursuing some of these very excellent books put out by Miss Lisa M. Bell. We said The Real Animals of Submarines and Ships, Boo Goes Who. We said The Adventures of Sunny Ray and Friends, A Christmas Tale, Cammy and Matrix Go to School, and Cammy, the Shelter's Deaf Puppy Makes a Friend. And that Bible study book called Will You, which is then coming soon in at a children's version as well. Miss Lisa M. Bell, it's been wonderful speaking with you, catching up, talking about like 52 topics in one. It's been a blast. So thanks for showing up and helping us out.
Thank you, Robert. It's been wonderful being on with you, and you have taught me much too. You are very good at what you do.
Well, thank you. Two-way street. Thanks for being here.
Okay. You have a good day.
You as well.
All right.